Good morning. It is Friday. It's November, what is it, the 8th? Yeah. Man, I can't believe it's been a full week. It's been an action packed week for me. I've been so busy. And busy is not always virtuous, but I feel really good about the work that has been done. There's no better feeling than getting to the end of a working period and going, man, I feel good about the work that I just did. Um, we have a God who works 6 days a week, and that's the imprint of how it is that we're supposed to. So I hope you've had a very productive week. I'll tell you, nothing makes my wife feel better than when she has had a very productive week where she's gotten a lot of things done. We're made to work, and then we're made to rest one day a week. So the way that Jews have always done it is that Friday is called the day of preparation, and that's when they prepare to just rest the next day. So get all the meals made, all the chores done, so that they can just rest in the Lord the next day. My wife and I try to do that. We have 5 young children, and that complicates things. But the older two are increasingly useful. So sometimes we beat back the gates of chaos and establish order in our realm. And so she looked at me this morning and said, "Man, I'm really excited just to sit around and visit with you tomorrow." And I said, "Yeah, I feel the same." I highly advise reclaiming Sabbath. I know it's abnormal thing to actually observe the Sabbath nowadays, but it's really important. It's made a big difference for my wife and me and our kids. Now, my kids love it so much they will shame me if I do anything laborious on the Sabbath. Today's Friday. It's been a dramatic week. We had our election that went very different from how a lot of people expected it to go. Um, I'm on X, and so every time I get on, they're just compilations of lefties losing it. And it's the thing I get particular joy out of is now that we're changing the laws around abortion, and women are feeling once again like uh, the consequences of their actions are something they're going to have to live with. There are many who are saying, "I'm not going to sleep with anyone now because if you're not going to let me abort my baby, then this is going to cost me more." And then a lot of conservatives are going, "We accept your terms. You probably should just stop sleeping around. It's not good for you." And if what it takes is to say, you can't erase the consequences of your action, if fine, yeah, let's do it. These terms are acceptable. The really sad thing is so many women. I'm more online than most of my audience, I think, but there are young women who are just getting hair clippers, and just buzzing off all their hair and just saying, "I'm not going to be attractive to you anymore." Um, and then as I look at that, that makes me sad, but that also makes me go, this probably is helping the outer match with the inner right now. Like, there are a lot of young people that really shouldn't be sleeping around, men and women, but they are attractive, and so that's something that enters the realm. So I actually think it's really good in a lot of ways for young people who really shouldn't be sleeping around to just make themselves unattractive. you know uh that's obviously not necessary when you're a Christian, I think. But one of the things that I think history shows is that Christians have developed the best way of life that promotes human flourishing, and modesty is a big part of that, especially for young people. That's something my wife and I are raising our kids, boys and girls, to be modest, and hopefully, they're going to be healthy and they're beautiful already. But even so, just to learn that joy of taking care of your vessel for the Lord and reserving your body for your spouse. It's just it sounds quaint, it sounds draconian, but it's what's called for. It's what the Lord requires, and so it's good to submit to that. It's not a loving thing to tell our young people that they can go and sow their wild oats and live as hedonists without consequence. That's not a loving thing. That's a hateful thing to do. Don't do that to your kids. Teach them early on that their body belongs to God, and that it's to be treated with dignity and honor. And God help us, we adults, we need to conduct ourselves exactly the same. I love having people in the comments. I love having people join. I mean, there's a reason why I do this live stream rather than, uh, tape it and then publish it later. And it's because I really like interacting with my friends. And I know a lot of these people. JP is just an hour south of me in Tulsa. Good to see you, brother. My brother Pat, I worship with him almost every morning. Joe Bollig, I don't know Joe. Joe, you're very welcome here. God bless you. Brewster's mom, Marianne Hunter from Northeast Tennessee. Good to see you, sister. Ben from Texas. Joe asked, 5 children. Are you sure you're not Catholic? I think we're all supposed to be fruitful and multiply. I think it can be a holy calling to be a eunuch for the kingdom, and Christ and Paul both bless that and say that's actually preferable. But I think marriage is for uh, raising Christian families and Christian children. That's when you look at the vast history of the Christian church, the primary way in which it has spread has been through the giving birth to and inculcating of children, and that's what we plan to do. We love having lots of kids. As we have more kids, we're more and more validated in the notion that families are made to be big. Um, when you have just a single child, things do not go well for that single child. I mean, they can. I mean, it's not like it's not worth being born, but children do better and better the more siblings they have. They learn how to share. They learn that life is not about them. Young females, in particular, learn how to deal with males in a healthier fashion when they have brothers. It's nothing but beneficial and wonderful. I highly recommend having lots of kids if your wife is on board for that. But my wife is, she's a happy lady. Good morning, Sister Jennifer. Don't know if it's just me, but locals didn't have the video this morning. Restream recently shuffled things around and it changed things. I don't know. Well, it looks like all these comments are from YouTube. So maybe we're only on YouTube right now. That would be frustrating. I need to figure out what's going on with Restream because, anyway, thank you for letting me know. Yeah, Jeff Harrison, it's called the 4B movement. That's what I was talking about with the young ladies shaving their heads off and saying, I'm not going to sleep with y'all no more. I forget. I actually didn't even learn what 4B stood for. I just saw that that's on X. So, yeah, it's a little funny. It's very sad. It's also funny. It's a sign of a depraved era. Good morning, my sister Eileen. JP says, I'm going to have to come over and take you and the family out to dinner. We never turn down dinner, but we are happy to host. So we'll have you and your wife over sometime. Good morning, Sister Evie. Scott, good morning. Happy Friday from Eastern Pennsylvania. Joe Bolig is ethnic. Are you saying that you're ethnic Volga German? We have another German who sometimes tunes in. Katrin, what is her last name? I forget her last name. Oh, you're on locals. Okay. Well, yeah. Local seems fine. So there was a false start this morning. I hit go live and then it went live on yesterday's stream. That's not supposed to happen. So there's something with the integration. Anyway, that might be what caused the rub in locals. I started off 2 minutes late this morning. That's why. There's a lot to talk about this morning. I'm not going to hit on a lot of it. I'm always frustrated whenever the live stream ends and I go, I wanted to talk about that and I want to talk about that. And I've also been feeling guilty lately. I should be praying more. I should be calling on the scriptures more. Also, today in 20 minutes, my friend Tyson Heins, I forgot to make a thumbnail for it. I'm uploading the thumbnail, but I'm going to be interviewing Tyson Heins. He's in my annual conference. He served on the Global Methodist Episcopacy Committee, so he was part of picking the assignments for all of the different bishops. He's very active laity. He's a very earnest believer. So I wanted to talk to him, and I figured a lot of y'all would enjoy getting to know him. He's on the live stream sometimes, but he's a busy guy. So anyway, I want to say a prayer this morning. And I didn't select it beforehand. Let's try. This is in the section on compassion and kindness, and it's written by the penitent pilgrim in 1641. Let's see the quality of this. Gracious Lord, in whom are laid up all the treasures of knowledge and wisdom. Direct me in the ways of life. Remove from me the ways of death. Give me a soft and meek spirit, that I may help the succorless and comfort the comfortless. O my dear Lord, pardon me for the neglect of this duty, and make me to redeem the time with a cheerful constancy. Amen. Not a bad prayer at all, a wonderful meditation. Snafus or snafus, good morning. This is Johanna from Texas. Big families are gifts. My mother and dad had 8. And yes, we were Catholics. It's just a sad thing when the Catholics and the Mormons are the ones who get the reputation for being the most fruitful. I think Methodists should also, provided that the mothers are on board, be fruitful and multiply. Man, there's nothing better than a big family life. I get home at the end of every evening to lots of happy voices greeting me, hugging me, needing me. It's a wonderful thing to go home and be needed. I mean, it's tiresome, but it's also wonderful. JP says, I'm going to have to talk to you about a crazy idea I have, but I'm optimistic of what God can do. So crazy isn't that far out of the realm of possibility. Man, we're living in a time right now where the rules have been thrown out. We're re-engaging critical thought. We're elevating very thoughtful people to positions of influence and even authority. I want to point you guys to an interview that I published yesterday. I think it was yesterday, with Joshua Nelson of the Barnabas Conference. He is starting a movement reclaiming early Methodist, early Christian modes of church planting and building up local churches. Very exciting to think about, hear about. Very well worth your time to learn about him and his ministry. Also, I did want to say on the top of this, and I already failed at that, but I look at the stats for how many people watch this live, which, by the way, we got 25 just on Facebook and YouTube. But then there are Rumble and X. And between all those, every live stream I do gets, 150, 200 views. And then I publish stuff later in the day. And it's not abnormal for me to get 1,000, 2,000, sometimes higher views. It's clear that a lot of people really appreciate the worldview I offer, the analysis I offer. I'm sure it's very imperfect. But, I've been at this a while. I'm going to continue to do this. This is a very fruitful ministry. I hope it's impactful. I hear almost every day from different people in the Methodist tribe, hey, doing good work here. I just need to be consistent about encouraging people. If you agree that this is a worthy project that needs to be supported, then the way you do that is by giving regularly at plainspoken.locals.com. You can also go to either of my Substacks. I've got my personal Substack, or you can go to the PlainSpoken podcast Substack. Either way, all of those places are places you can support my work, and then eventually I can produce even more, even higher quality content for the people called Methodist. And of course, I'm primarily within the global Methodist sphere, but I want to serve all people who really I want to be of service to the whole Christian community, because I really am of the mind that we've culturally been on the defense, and that really should not be. Now, I'm not necessarily on board with like the theonomists and we should be in charge of everything and we should have coercive power. We were talking about this yesterday. But I'm definitely of the mind that we need voices that are not crazy, and I'd like to think I'm not crazy, that are helping lead fruitful, faithful conversations. And so I just really want to urge you, if you've benefited from me, if you've been glad to have me be part of the conversation, then this is the place you need to go. And of course, I offer benefits to those who support me. I have a morning worshiping community that I'm happy to induct you into on Zoom. It's a wonderful community. I also put stuff on Locals that nobody else can see. And we're going to go there halfway through the conversation with my friend Tyson this morning. So really consider it. $5 a month is not much, especially after inflation. So consider it. All right. I want to talk about things. Let's talk about Frank Turek. Oh, and I forgot to take. All right, so here's Frank right here. If you don't know who Frank is, he's a Christian apologist. He's very public about it. He's very good about it. He goes to college campuses, and he has slideshow presentations. He's very professional, and he's very personal. He's very good at his job, and he's in great shape for a man his age. He's got an online ministry that is very impressive. If you don't know what apologetics is, it's not apologizing for the faith. It's explaining the faith to worldly people and anticipating their arguments and having a well reasoned argument and response. So he deals with the worst of the worst, and he's very gracious. I admire his ministry a lot. He's even doing a thing now where he's publishing stuff in all these different languages and using AI to make it so it uses his likeness and it makes him look like he's speaking all these different languages in his own language, in his own. I don't know how the tech works, but it's really impressive. He has a very fruitful and impressive ministry. Yesterday, we were talking about Christian nationalism and the fact that it's kind of not a real concept, but also that the left is using it just kind of to get hysterical and talk about this being the end of the world, the end of a free society. Frank Turek, this article kind of anticipates that leftist critique, and I thought it would be helpful just to read through a few paragraphs of it. It's written by Rick Plasterer of the IRD, and I've noticed that he is routinely very thoughtful. He treats subjects with the respect and thoroughness and nuance that they deserve. So if his isn't a name that you know, I've actually never found anything that Plasterer has written that I've thought was off base. He's just a name worth knowing. An earlier article reviewed the comments of Frank Turek, president of the apologetics ministry Cross Examine. I think there's supposed to be a D in there, crossexamined.org, regarding the need to adhere to logic rather than feelings and rhetoric in engaging politics and society. And it was at the National Apologetics Conference of the Southern Evangelical Seminary in Rock Hill, South Carolina, in earlier October. In a concluding address, Turek examined the why Christians ought to be actively involved in American politics as a matter of Christian discipleship. So here's the key question. Can we legislate morality? Turek asked. He said that all politics is an attempt to implement morality. So can we legislate morality? Yeah, we do. We always have. That's the only kind of legislation there is that has a moral value. Secondly, he asked, should Christians be involved in politics? So can we legislate morality? Should Christians be involved in politics? Finally, he asked, what should Christians do when we don't like any available choice? All right, so this was pertinent for a lot of Christians. Definitely didn't like Kamala, but Trump is a problematic guy anyway. Can Christians just choose the lesser of two evils? So on the first question, he said that American governments legislate on abortion, life, marriage, men and women's sports, transitioning children, parental rights, murder, theft, rape, etc. These are all clearly moral issues. In fact, all laws legislate morality. The question is, whose morality? Every law, quote, declares one behavior to be right and another behavior to be wrong, end quote. Any Christian motivation in politics will lead to a separation of church and state objection, Turek said. And this is not in the Constitution. But even if it were, legislation would still be about moral issues. So the separation of church and state is not written in the Constitution. It's a cultural norm, came from language of Thomas Jefferson in some letter. Even so, it has a long precedent of implementation in the American way in a specific way. So I'm not going to get into that right now. On the second question, Christian involvement in politics, Turek noted that Thomas Jefferson, in his letter to the Danbury, Connecticut Baptist, didn't want, quote, the government telling the church what to do, end quote, but did favor religious influence on politics. So we've talked about this before. When you're talking about the distinctly American way of separation of church and state, what it actually is a one-way relationship. The state cannot and should not influence the church. The church can and should influence the state. If the state cannot enact laws which agree with the Bible, there can be no laws against murder or theft. Christians impose not a morality to their liking, but the natural law written on the human heart, evident to all, and enforced in civilized societies, and also expounded in Scripture. So, what Turek would say is the only reason we have any moral laws in the world is because they come from God. Now, the most explicit and true form of that is the explicitly Christian worldview. But even, why do other societies have laws against murder and against rape? Well, it's because God's natural law is written on our hearts. This is what Romans 1 and 2 addresses. It's even though we are distorted and corrupted, that doesn't mean that we have no access to God's goodness and truth. It just means that we have limited and distorted access. So some things are still plain to see, but then whenever it gets to what is good and perfect and true and loving, that stuff is only purchased by the blood of Christ Jesus and in faithful covenant relationship with him. So to a certain degree, it's dishonest when we who know the truth have to act as though we don't in order to get along. That's dishonest and unhelpful. When we do know what saves, what gives life, what promotes human flourishing, then not providing that is a hateful thing. We'll go a little bit further with the article, but we can't read the whole thing. Turek presented the famous satellite photograph of the Korean peninsula at night, in which one can easily discern South Korea's boundaries with the sea and the frontier with North Korea. South Korea was ablaze with light, whereas North Korea was dark. If you haven't seen that photo, it's nuts. The difference between the two states lies in politics. Quote, the South has political freedom, which the North does not, end quote. Because politics is so consequential to life, it is ridiculous to adopt a policy of, quote, I just preach the gospel. I don't get involved politically, end quote. The very ability to preach the gospel is dependent, at least to some degree, on what the state allows. Nor will the law protect religious freedom if, quote, the wrong judges get in place. So this very much taps into yesterday's conversation about when Christ gives to us, when the Lord gives to us certain talents, certain capacities, then it becomes sinful not to use it. As in the parable of the talents, God condemns the one who is given only one talent and does not use it, but instead buries it and then renders it back at the end of when the master returns. We likewise are to use what we've been given for God's glory in the world. And there's a legitimate question of, to the degree of coercion, can we coerce others? And so that's what we were talking about yesterday. That's what I'm still praying on and meditating about. But it does seem pretty clear that it's a silly and modern notion that our faith doesn't impact the public. And indeed, progressive liberal Christians impact public policy all the time and seek to change laws. They get up at state legislatures and talk. They advance certain policies. There's no reason why lefty religion should impact things. Right-leaning religion, the critique offered from the left yesterday that we talked about was that Christian nationalism starts with certain political loyalties and then puts the Bible into that. But what Turek said just a minute ago in this article was that the Christian political convictions come out of the scriptures and naturally lead in certain directions that promote flourishing, but also restraint and modesty and self-denial. And so a licentious society will always hate that and will always speak evil against people who do that, saying that they just want to control people's bodies or take us back to the Dark Ages, or they're racist and they want to keep other races under subjection. These are all things that are said so that they don't really have to engage the cross. So it's important to see these things for what they are. I really appreciate Frank Turek's ministry. If you're interested in him, then you should search his name and check him out. He has a lot of great content on the internet. I'll look at comments real quick and then we'll go on. Evie says, I'm one of six military families lean this way too. Yeah, I've known some military families that had more children than usual. Talking about the Josh Nelson interview, JP says it was so good. I'm going to be reaching out to them about my crazy idea as well, and possibly the EMC. That would be Evangelical Methodist Church. I've been talking with the nearest super independent, and I let him know about Barnabas. I also should let you know, I think tomorrow morning I'll be publishing an interview with Kim Reisman. We spoke yesterday. She's the head of World Methodist Evangelism, and they are considered a formal mission partner of the Global Methodist Church. They're a pan Christian organization aimed at revitalizing churches and equipping churches to do evangelism in the Wesleyan way. Very decent interview. You might want to make sure to check that out. If you haven't subscribed to me yet, I mean, that's the best way to know whenever I publish stuff. Subscribe. If you're on like YouTube, hit the notification bell. I know I was putting out too much content throughout the day. Now I only put it out at the most twice a day, so it's okay to hit the notification bell. And then if you're on other, just make sure you stay posted with the stuff I put out because a lot of it's really good. Marianne says, I had an evangelistic UMC pastor who taught we are not called to make children as New Testament believers. We are called to make disciples. Children do not always become Christian disciples. I just think that's a weird argument. I mean, you can't make anyone do anything, but the question is this fundamental question of are you utilizing the resources at your disposal to glorify God or not? And so, yeah, see your family as potential disciples. Absolutely. You can't make someone be a disciple, but you have a lot more influence on your kids than anybody else in the world. And so, yeah, lovingly make your kids disciples. Open that door wide to them, correct them, rebuke them, encourage them, exhort them. There is nothing wrong with seeing your children as, I mean, when we're praying with our kids, we speak to the Lord in front of our children. Father, these children are not ours, they are yours. We make sure that our children identify primarily as children of their Father in heaven before my son or daughter, and that's a good and loving thing, you know. So there's absolutely nothing to be ashamed of when intentionally raising children for the Lord and directing children towards Him. And there's nothing wrong with being crestfallen and disappointed whenever they choose another way. But generally speaking, when children are raised to see life through that lens and to have a living and active relationship with their Father in heaven, even if they leave, many will return. Wayne, good morning from Kentucky. Jennifer says Frank Turek has a great podcast, Cross Examined. I didn't know he put out a podcast. I'm not paying attention. Good morning, Duncan. All right, let's look at another article, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time with this, but y'all know that I've been kind of eager to talk about the Anglican Church in North America. Methodism came out of a revival in the Anglican tradition. The ACNA, Anglican Church in North America, came out of the Episcopal Church several years ago. I've interviewed David Roseberry. My interview with Joshua Nelson, he came out of the Episcopal Church as well. They are the evangelical conservative refusal to go along with the mainline progressive liberal program. So the Episcopal Church and the United Methodist Church are both mainline liberal progressive, and then ACNA and GMC are both refusing to go along, and they've split off now. So we have a shared heritage theologically. We have a shared recent history rebuking progressivism. It makes sense to me that we'd be in a relationship with one another. So I've talked about developments in that potential relationship. Bishop Scott Jones from the GMC has been in formal conversations with ACNA leadership about shared sacramental authority, shared acknowledgement of the sacraments and ordination. I am very much, I've had people write and say, no, we can't go this way. But I like it. You know, my wife and I use the Book of Common Prayer in daily devotional practice at home. I think that there is a wellspring of wisdom and theological maturity available in that tradition. I would love for us to walk hand in hand into the future. And so, to that end, I think it's just important to follow developments there. This is an article written at the Living Church. I don't know who they are. It's for serving the Episcopal Church and the Anglican community since 1878. It was written by Jeff Walton, who also writes for the IRD. I'll make this a bit bigger. Oops, that's the wrong thing. For y'all to be able to read. Excuse me. Steve Wood, I just read a profile on him. This is a photo of his installation service. This was on November 1st. And that the article was written, and this happened on October 30th, in a service marked by pageantry, prayers, and celebratory bagpipes. The Anglican Church in North America received its new archbishop and primate on October 30th. Hosted on the Mount Pleasant, South Carolina campus of Seacoast, a non-denominational megachurch, the gathering drew together clergy, bishops, and laity from across the denomination, as well as global Anglican and ecumenical visitors. The Most Reverend Steve Wood, elected to a 5-year term in office by the denomination's College of Bishops on June 22nd, became Archbishop at the conclusion of the ACNA Provincial Assembly later that week in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. Wood is the third archbishop to lead the ACNA since it was formed in 2009 from the several groups of former Episcopalians and other Anglican groups, including the Reformed Episcopal Church. Wood is a former Episcopalian who began his ministry in the Diocese of Ohio. The denomination in 2023 counted a membership of 128,114 and an attendance of 84,794 spread across 1,013 congregations. So GMC already dwarfs them, which is kind of cool. Wood will remain diocesan bishop of the Anglican Diocese of the Carolinas, based in Mount Pleasant. The October 30th investiture functioned as a commissioning ceremony with Archbishop Laurent Banda of Uganda, chairman of the Global Anglican Future Conference, GAFCON. So GAFCON is an acronym. If you start following their stuff, GAFCON is like the conservative holdout conglomeration of Anglican churches. Anglicanism is more complicated than I've come to understand yet. It has a series of different levels of relationships that are, some are on the outs, some are on the in. That's not a saying. Some are closer to the Archbishop of Canterbury, who seems to have been compromised by the left. And in North America, in England at least, the Anglican Church, Episcopal Church, has been compromised by Western materialist, hedonist values. But abroad, there are different communions of Anglicans that are maintaining biblical standards. So the ACNA is trying to do this as well. One of the things that that different people have lifted up is Anglicanism is such a broad tradition at this point that global Methodists are really risking a lot by coming close, because not only do you have a diversity of worship styles, which is seen later in this article, I'm not going to go back to it, but there, you have old school Anglican with chant, and then you have new stuff that doesn't look anything like that, where you're singing Bethel and all kinds of new stuff and not even following liturgy. So you have a wide disparity of culture there, but you also have people from all over the left-right spectrum in the Anglican tent, not in the ACNA. ACNA is doing a good job maintaining the standard, but there isn't necessarily a set, defined, adhered to theology that they kick people out when they are in violation of. And so this is one of the things to be wary of, is right now there might be groups that look how we want to look or don't bother us. But if they don't have the right safeguards in place, they can drift. And then we've got the same situation that we had, that we came out of. So we have to be willing to deal with drift internally, kicking out people who try and drift. But then also with any relationships that we have, we need to regularly review those relationships and end them if there is drift in the direction of worldliness on any number of accounts. So keep praying for the ACNA connection. If there's a reason why we should definitely not go that way, then it's important to make sure that I know that, so I quit talking so optimistically about that. But y'all know I'm big on Christian unity. I love the idea of coming together around the cross and allowing for variation where we can, and I think we can allow for variation in more areas than a lot of people know or think. But I think with the ACNA and GMC, it's just a slam dunk. Let's look at the United Methodist Bishops. So this is a group that I don't think we can have fellowship with. I think they serve a different Jesus. I think they proclaim a different gospel. Talked with Kim Reisman about that on the interview I had with her yesterday. We'll publish it tomorrow. But they just put out a statement on the election, which, if you've been watching these things, you can kind of anticipate the direction this goes. It's kind of brief. I thought we'd read over it and I would just, say a few words. So this is directly from the United Methodist Bishops.org website. United Methodist Church Bishops issue statement on U.S. elections. So this was published yesterday. That's the president of the Council of Bishops, Tracy S. Malone. Here's the pastoral letter from the Council of Bishops of the UMC. Starts off with the scriptural quotation, "Now faith, hope, and love remain, and the greatest of these is love." So one of my primary critiques that I've issued of the religious left is that they start with the issues that scriptures point to, faith, hope, and love, and they define those subjectively. What do faith, hope, and love mean to me? And then they put that on the Bible and say, well, here's how what it has to mean, because I've defined what it has to mean. And you'll see that in the statement. So, greetings. May the grace of God and the peace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with your spirits. Amid the change and uncertainty that have resulted from the recent U.S. elections and the ways in which these matters will impact the whole world, we remember that we are held by the enduring power of God's love and the call to be agents of that love in the world. So if you watched Kamala Harris's speech, I think it was yesterday, maybe it was the day before, where she conceded defeat, she said some good and helpful stuff about peaceful transfer of power, about loving the country, about standing together and seeking unity, but there was also a call, we're going to keep fighting. And I find myself, it's not as though we should roll over. If we lost the election on the cultural right, and maybe we still did, but assuming the other side had lost the election, should they just roll over and give in to the direction things are going? No. But I guess I don't feel like this language of fighting is helpful. And I know I've said in different times we need to learn how to fight in a healthy and holy way. And there is a time for fighting. But I think when you're talking about what language can we use that's actually helpful for creating unity, it needs to be engaging in critical thought and discourse. This is the hard work that needs to be done. Do we have things to learn from one another? Yes, absolutely. But it shouldn't be done in a mode of fighting or contention or even in competition. It should be in an openness to the truth. And the thing that's such an enemy to this is the postmodern notions that there is no truth. And that's why you can't have conversations with some people. When they think all there is power and not truth, then you can't have a conversation with them. But as long as we all agree there is a truth and we can seek it together and find it together, then I think we can have a collegial and loving and respectful discourse, even as a nation. And that's what I would love to see. And that's what should have happened within the church. The problem and dysfunction in the United Methodist Church wasn't necessarily that we weren't all of one mind, but it was that the people who were in the minority, who were repeatedly shut down, weren't willing to listen. They weren't willing to respect and honor the perspectives of those on the other side. They weren't willing to even comprehend it at a certain point. They grew increasingly intolerant, and then they coercively took the gears of power and alienated the majority, the silent and loving majority, from their own denomination, which is the heartache of the last few years. And the very same people who hijacked the denomination are now in charge, and they're the ones issuing this statement. We find ourselves at a critical historical juncture that future generations will scrutinize. It presses upon the Council of Bishops of the United Methodist Church, a worldwide body, to speak and act with moral clarity, guided by the teachings of Jesus Christ and all our commitment to justice and compassion for all. What the silent part that they're not quite saying out loud is the current leadership that just won is so morally reprehensible that to go along with this new leadership in the White House is a humanitarian issue, and people in the future will look back and say, how could you have gone along with it? They're very much buying into this narrative that Donald Trump is the new Hitler, the party in control is the new Nazis, and just like we look back on Third Reich Germany and go, how could you go along with the Nazis? They're inferring that that's another historical moment that we're in right now. We affirm the inherent dignity of all God's children. As our social principles remind us, quote, God calls all members of the human family to recognize and protect the dignity and worth of all people, end quote. The lessons of history teach us the dangers of silence in the face of threats to human rights. Therefore, we cannot remain silent. We call upon all United Methodists to exercise their faith and to pray, speak, and act for justice and peace. So they're not being explicit here, but the context makes clear that they think that the Trump administration is dehumanizing, is going to create classes of people that are persecuted. In particular, they're looking at the LGBTQ plus crew, which, by the way, I saw that the Reconciling Ministries Network, which is part of this, uh, they were a special interest group that got special donor money from outside. The Arcus Foundation is where they got their money to change the UMC's stance. They've promoted VBS, pro-gay curriculum that was funded by the denomination. Anyway, they're bad faith actors, but they have started a hotline now for people to call in and vent their hysteria about Trump being in charge. It's important for people to know. I don't know how many people know this. Donald Trump's administration has done more to protect gay people internationally than any other administration. He very intentionally commissioned many ambassadors to make it an explicit goal of the United States to change the laws in other countries that outlaw sexual immorality. That's Trump has pushed that. His administration has pushed that more than any other administration I'm aware of. And they touted that while he was in office. They interviewed a number of ambassadors, one in particular that was explicitly openly gay. So I think part of the problem of the era that we're living in is that we gaslight each other. We don't listen to each other. We just roll our eyes at each other when one side gets worked up about something. And I don't think that's a helpful disposition to have. But I also have to just say, so much of there's this skit this guy does, "Stop making me defend Donald Trump." He's not the biggest fan of Donald Trump, but people continue to spout stuff from the media about Donald Trump that's false, and he has to correct that just for the sake of the truth. And they go, "Why are you defending Donald Trump?" And that's how I feel sometimes, is like there's plenty to be disappointed in. I do not like that Donald Trump contributed to inflation the way that he did at the end of his tenure. We had the COVID crisis, started just printing out all this money. Yes, Biden did the exact same thing, but it bothers me that Trump did that. It bothers me that he gave authority to people who made bad judgment calls with respect to the COVID response. These are problems, legitimate problems to have with Donald Trump. But there are so many other things that are trumped up by the media that just aren't true, like saying that what's her face needed to be put in front of a firing squad. When you look at the context of what he said, he was not at all being literal. He was talking about war hawks sending other people's kids off to war and needing to feel some empathy with them. So, there are so many false things that get touted, and you don't need to do that. The notion that Trump is anti-gay or anti-black and is going to create second-class citizens doesn't seem to have any real basis in reality. So the fact that the bishops are putting out this statement that is implying these things indicates that they're just uncritically watching network news, that they are of a mindset that doesn't engage these things critically, doesn't go to the source, but just takes what they're given and regurgitates the emotive manipulation of what they encounter on network news. Our baptismal vows call us to resist evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves. We therefore reject rhetoric, policies, and actions that demean or discriminate against any of God's children, and will be vigilant in defending the rights of the vulnerable and speaking out against oppression. So this in particular is gearing people up for resisting any efforts to close the border, to deport people who entered the country illegally. There's so many people that can't even consider such things, because if you talk about illegal immigrants, they'll say things like, "No person is illegal," which is ridiculous because you can do illegal things, but then you make it so that people can't even conceptualize of this stuff. And then whenever he talks about how other countries are emptying their prisons and mental facilities and sending people across the borders, which has been shown to be true, as soon as he brings these things up, or people that come across the border and commit crimes, they say this is criminalizing all these people, dehumanizing all these people, and it makes it so that there can be no discernment in trying to um, rein in how crazy it is, how many people we've let in that are not being naturalized, that are not being socialized, that are causing harm. So what the bishops are doing in this statement is gearing people up for political turmoil and resisting the duly elected authority. And so whenever it's quoting, we have to resist evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms that they present themselves. They are christening, sanctifying disobedience, resistance, rebellion against authority. Now, is that always bad? No. We have the example of the apostles in Acts of the Apostles. Whenever worldly authorities call them and say, stop preaching in the name of Jesus, they say, we have to fear God rather than you. We have to obey God rather than you. We can't give you what you're asking for here. And that is a legitimate posture to take. That's a far cry from saying we need to make sure that the White House conforms to all of our values and morals. And if they don't, then we need to publicly speak and stand against them. That's Christian nationalism that I don't find. I mean, of course, a non-believer in the White House or a nominal believer in the White House is not going to govern according to the Bible as you read it. So, be tolerant of that. Tolerance is the virtue of the left. You have to be tolerant of people governing in ways, especially when there are laws on the book. We're a country of laws. You have to put what's on the books into action. But if you're gearing people up for resistance and you're taking a cultural side as bishops, I mean, there's been a long, long series of Episcopal leadership and decisions in the UMC siding with the Democrat Party, the cultural left, and making very clear that this is not going to be an organization of centrist or right-leaning people. Final paragraph. To people of all generations, especially our young, who learn for a more just and inclusive world, your vision of passion give us hope. We commit to working alongside you to build the beloved community that reflects God's kingdom on earth. In the days ahead, we will continue this vital work uninterrupted and with renewed vigor. And we commit ourselves to prayer for our political leaders around the globe. So that final, I mean, if that was all it was, it'd be fine. But in the context of the current historical moment and what came before, the language about building that beloved community should be read probably as largely synonymous with the neo-Marxist vision of the communist utopia being legislated from above and then conforming everybody to the equitable, equal, godless utopia, which is a vision that has moved the cultural left in this country popularly for 90 years. I don't know. It never works. It always goes in awful directions. That's largely what this red wave was, a rebuke of the cultural left trying to legislate their morality on the rest of us. And so, in dialogue with the Frank Turek bit that we did earlier, can you legislate morality? The answer is, well, yeah, all laws have moral value. But then what happens when you try and legislate a morality on people that is foreign and unnatural? And the answer is what we just saw in the election. So we've already legislated a ton of morality. We're going to continue to legislate our morality. We have to do so in a healthy dialogue with the people on the ground. And when you talk past them, when you hate them, when you call them deplorables, bitter clingers, garbage, then there's going to be a reaction, and that's a legitimate reaction. And you can continue to hate them. You can continue to make high-minded, big pronouncements against them, but that is going to continue to alienate you, harm you, make you more bitter. And that's just not a helpful way to be. I hope we see a change in the discourse. I really wish that the Lord would bless the United Methodist bishops with an ounce of self-awareness and humility. I think that would be a really wonderful thing for this point in history, and the fact that they're digging their heels in and that they're not just giving permission to, but in a sense facilitating other people to dig their heels in is really unfortunate, I think. I think it shows a lack of spiritual discernment, a lack of an interest in serving the present age, a lack in healing the harm of the last few years, and is, well, I'm embarrassed for him, but I've been embarrassed for him for a long time. All right, let's look at some more comments, and then we'll do one more topic. Oh my gosh, I've been putting off Tyson. Poor Tyson. I completely forgot what I was doing today. Oh man, let's see if he's waiting on me or not. I'm such a bad friend. We'll see if it comes up in a second. It works through Zoom, and then I'm supposed to get a link. Dude might have already gotten upset with me and hung up, and he would be right to do so. Oh, thanks to Eileen for joining Locals, and Jeff, Will, and Andrew Marlowe. God bless all of you guys. There's Tyson. All right, I'm going to apologize to him. I can't believe I forgot. I talked about it at the start of this hour, and then I just got so into what we were talking about. Tyson.
Howdy.
Hey, I put you off, and I'm really sorry.
Worries.
All right, it says your video. I'm going to ask you to start video now. There we are. Okay.
I was working on it, just a little bit slow.
Here's my friend Tyson, y'all. He's in the Heartland Annual Conference with me. He's laity. He's served on recently. He was voted. He was a general conference delegate, and then he was voted to serve on the Episcopacy Committee. And he serves in a number of capacities on the local church level, on the general church level, and he's a professional who works at he's an instructor, a guide for other people in a very technical job. And so he and I have written and talked to each other for, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years now. Very faithful man, faithful believer, tied to men's ministry that we'll talk about some. So anyway, y'all, this is my friend Tyson that I put off for 23 minutes, and I'm very sorry to you, brother. Thank you for joining me this morning. Are you feeling all right?
I'm feeling just fine. You were on a roll though, so I figured we would eventually get around to having a discussion. But
I was on a roll, and I figured you would probably agree with most of that. So anyway, go ahead.
I am a chemistry instructor at a nuclear power plant, the only nuclear power plant here in Kansas. And I am coming to you all today from Ebenezer Global Methodist Church, which is in Opie, Kansas. I'm actually in the fellowship hall because they have much better internet than I do at my house. So I didn't want to be dropping out.
Appreciate that. Yeah, you look good. And all the colors go well together. You got the red, white, and blue. And Jesus on your shirt. Surely everybody, I assume that's Jesus.
It is. I figure I'm a big piece of moving real estate, and so I ought to advertise something worthwhile.
Well, if that's about the most worthwhile thing in this world. So, yeah, Tyson, you are unashamed and unafraid of proclaiming your Christian identity. Every time I've seen you, yeah, you're a walking billboard for Jesus, and that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
So let's talk about. Go ahead, brother.
Go ahead. Oh, I was going to say he did a lot for me. I ought to at least be able to wear a shirt for him, right?
That's right. So I gave you an intro already, and then there's a lot more to understand in who you are. I think a lot of people are going to enjoy listening to you because you can give a view of what it's like serving in the GMC, what you're seeing in your context in Kansas, but also from the top, having worked at the top and the bottom. I think a lot of people would be very interested in seeing what you see and being drawn to what you're drawn to. So could you tell us about your church context, where you're at in Kansas?
Yeah, we're a little rural church, probably. I haven't been down to visit you in Nowata, but I would imagine we're a little bit similar. We're out in the country, and my church was actually established before 1909, but the building that we're in was 1909. It was rebuilt from a fire, and a lot of my family attends the church. In fact, probably more than half of the church is my family, and so it definitely means a lot to me. And it is obviously a rural setting. I would probably go back to start my discussion and kind of help everyone understand. I would probably go back all the way to 2015. and that was in the Great Plains Conference. That was when the Great Plains Conference decided that they were going to put forth a petition at annual conference to start removing or to attempt to remove the language against homosexuality from the Book of Discipline.
Mhm.
And at that time, one of my friends, who is now definitely a very good friend, who was a pastor in the United Methodist Church, had his credentials with him and took them up during that annual conference and said, I can no longer be a part of this.
Mm.
And so he left, and he still is a very good friend of mine. I respect him a lot. His name's Rob. And he has some awesome ministries as well. So he might be someone you'd want to talk to sometime as well, also. But in 2016, of course, at the general conference, they decided to form the commission on a way forward. And at that time, Ebenezer responded by withholding their apportionments. They voted to withhold their apportionments. And they didn't start paying apportionments again until the 2019 conference, when we adopted the traditional plan. And during that time, I kind of was, I'll admit it, I was a kind of asleep at the wheel. I wasn't paying attention to the global or to the general conference or to the much really to the annual conference either. But I was focused on local ministry, and it was actually in 2017. You mentioned the men's ministry, and so it's not just men's. There's also women's, but it's Encounter the Cross. And I went to my first encounter in 2017, and at that time, I had you know, I would have been very truthful, would not have been lying at the time if I would have said that Jesus was my savior. But if I had go on and say Jesus was my Lord, I would have been lying. And so I think there's a lot of us out there that we don't really have the relationship that we should have. And I realized there that I wasn't letting him direct my life. And so I changed some things at that men's encounter. It was very transformative for me. And I would highly encourage anyone to attend, if they get a chance to go to men's or women's encounter, to say yes, because it is 3 days that can really change people's lives. And if you're already a Christian, it will deepen your faith. And if you're not, you'd be hard pressed to come away from there without understanding the gospel.
Could you say a little bit more about what it means to say that Christ is your Lord and what the difference was that was needed for you?
So I probably, like a lot of people out there, I knew all the right songs to sing. I knew how to go to the service and act correctly. But I didn't have a shirt on every day. And I will have a Christian shirt on every day, which doesn't say that I'm a Christian, but I have changed my entire outlook. I mean, I would encourage, even if it's only 5 minutes. One of my friends always says, even if it's 5 minutes, if that's all you can spare in your day, because we're all really busy, but set aside 5 minutes to meet with Jesus. Because if you're really in a relationship with him, then he is your friend, and you could make 5 minutes a day to talk to your friend, right? And so if it's only 5 minutes, set that appointment, 5 minutes with Jesus, and then keep it. The big part of it is keep it every morning, keep it every day when you start your day. And so I have, I might talk about this more a little bit later, but when we disaffiliated, I led the church. I was responsible for every service and for several months. And I realized at that point, and I actually I've got a Bible that every time I preach, I have a Bible, and I don't know how well this will show up, what it says on there. Oops. But I put Christ's bondservant on my Bible that I preach from to remind me that I am a servant, and I can't say, if Christ is truly my Lord, then I can't say no to him when he tells me to go do something. And I have chosen if you know what a bondservant is in the Bible, right? I don't have, my ear hasn't been pierced on the door frame, but my heart has been pierced by Christ.
Mm,
And so I serve him because I love him. And
yeah.
I'm a slave to him because of my love for him and the massive debt that he has paid for me.
Mm. All right. So I think that's a wonderful testimony, and thank you for sharing that with me, brother. And then I always want to make sure that people who spend their time with me feel moved in that direction of submission uh, to their Lord. And I appreciate you being a visible representation of what that can and perhaps should look like. Within the Global Methodist Church, you said you're preaching all the time. Are you still the primary leader in your community?
No, well, yes, somewhat. I mean, we do have a pastor now, but I tend to get leadership roles at the church. And so when we decided, of course, in 2019, when the traditional plan was adopted, we went ahead and began paying apportionments again. But then in 2022, the Kansas Supreme Court found a right to abortion in the um, Kansas Constitution,
Mm,
and so there was an effort to have a constitutional amendment. It was called the Value Them Both Amendment. And so I actually got more involved and wrote a petition to the annual conference of the Great Plains annual conference. And they of course, they had to accept the petition, but it was asking the United Methodist Church to take a stand in accordance with their book of discipline that was in favor of the Value Them Both Amendment. And I couldn't be there the first day of the conference. I wasn't the lay delegate at that time, and I couldn't be there. So I went to try and I was going to be there on Friday when that petition would be discussed. And in legislative moves prior to when it should have been just a formality approving the agenda,
mhm,
those who were opposing it got it out of the agenda. And the conservatives that were there, no one spoke. The left side, they spoke against it. They called everything that I wrote a bunch of lies.
mm,
And the Nebraska side, because Great Plains is Nebraska also, Nebraska said, we don't care because it doesn't affect us. And so they took it off of the conference agenda. And a lot of the conservatives said they were caught by surprise and they didn't respond in time that were actually there. But at that point, I knew that the church that I was in, I could never stay in. And so I left.
So my question, and this has to do with the GMC, you said there were conservatives there and none of them spoke. One of the concerns that I've had is that a lot of the leadership in the GMC is the same people that were in the UMC. And so I've wondered about our capacity to speak when we need to speak and to have the hard conversations when we need to have them. And you've had a perspective from the top that I haven't. You've been at the annual conference that we've had in the Heartland, but you've also been at the other denominational gatherings. Do you think that there has been a change in the mentality of conservatives who previously didn't speak, or do you think that we have some work to do so far as conservatives learning to speak up when we need to speak?
I think that we probably still have some work to do. So there's a movie that I showed on the 26th here at the church called Letter to the American Church by Metaxas. Eric Metaxas is the book. But it talks about how in Nazi Germany, there were 18,000 pastors, German pastors, and 3,000 of them stood against Hitler, and 3,000 of them aligned with Hitler, and 12,000 of them sat on the fence.
Mm,
And if those 12,000 had stood against, would we have even had Hitler rise to power?
mm,
There's no way to know for sure. But I think, and what Metaxas does in Letter to the American Church is he draws the parallel that we're doing the same thing in the American church right now.
Mhm.
We don't stand on truth. And so, I mean, if we think where Protestantism came out of, right? I mean, if you go back to Martin Luther at the Diet of Worms, when he's defending himself, he says, "Here I stand on the word of God. I can do no other." Are we willing to stand on the word of God? And I think that the quality of people, the people in the Global Methodist Church, are much more likely to do so than our former denomination. But I do think it was like several people came up to me, and they tried later on at that general conference. They tried to speak out and to say, what I think we should have discussed this in the agenda, and they were shouted down by people. I mean, it got pretty nasty from what I understand there at the conference.
Jennifer Groff, who is a part of the same conference as you, she's on the chat saying the general the annual conference actively worked against the amendment Tyson is talking about, and it was awful. So it sounds like I should have been watching and highlighting some of that stuff on PlainSpoken, although it sounds like this kind of happened before PlainSpoken got off the ground. So, but yeah, you're very familiar, it seems, with what exactly the problem was, and then what it is that the GMC needs to be really preparing for and guarding itself against. So I don't think I let you finish your story of navigating things out of that. So pick up where you left off.
Well, so I decided I had to leave, and I was hoping, like I said, this is the only church I've ever known, so I was hoping it was going to go with me. But I then became very knowledgeable about paragraph 2553 and started working. And in October of 2022, Ebenezer voted to leave the United Methodist Church. And I knew a lot of stuff. And the other thing that was good about me was I wasn't bound by, I didn't have to ask a pastor permission like a fellow pastor might to come in and speak to their church. And so I went and talked to several churches that were getting no information. Of course, it was there, but it wasn't being shared necessarily about disaffiliation. And so I led Ebenezer through disaffiliation, talked to several other churches in the area. And then I also, after we voted to disaffiliate, which was in the fall of 2022, in the beginning of 2023, all right, now that we've decided to leave, where are we going to go? And had several different speakers come in. We talked about going independent. We talked about going with Wesleyan. And we had some friends that I know, Wesleyan side, come through, Nazarene. We looked at several different options, and then we ultimately chose to go with the Global Methodist Church. But we became Global Methodist on July 1st of 2023 after the approval by the Heartland Annual Conference, or not the Heartland, it would have been the Great Plains Annual Conference, sorry. And it was we lost our pastor as well, and he wasn't necessarily against. He didn't really impact or sway one way or the other. He didn't attempt to sway one way or the other. But he was a military chaplain, and he was in the reserves. But his wife was active duty, so she had been assigned in Kansas, but then she got reassigned to South Carolina. And so he took this as God's leading for him, that it was time to go join his family in South Carolina. And no one could blame him for that. So he left. And so from mid-June until October of 2023, I was in charge of the services, not only at Ebenezer, but our sister church. We were, at the time, when we were in the UMC, we were a three-point charge. But our 3-point dissolved, and we ended up in a 2-point charge. And so the Madison Global Methodist Church, just about 10 miles down the road from us, I was working to fill their pulpit as well. And so I had a gentleman, his name is Mark, from the Methodist Church down there in Madison, and he was just starting to get his feet wet in the lay speaking, and so he started, and he felt comfortable doing one one Sunday a month normally. And so I would arrange for a pastor to come in and bless do communion, do the first service. And luckily for me, because of my Feed Christ Lambs ministry, I knew lots of pastors in the area from every denomination. I wanted to take my youth group back in 2014 to come see the movie God's Not Dead, and it wasn't going to play in Emporia. And so I'm not the youth group leader anymore, but I was then. And so I went to their website to find out where it was going to play. And I found out that all I needed to do to get God's Not Dead to come to Emporia was to buy 500 movie tickets. So very much to my wife's dismay and anxiety, I put 600 movie tickets on my credit card.
Oh my gosh.
And then I went out to the area churches and said, hey, I've got about 540 extra movie tickets. Would you guys like to go to this movie? And by the time it was all said and done, I had handed out 900 movie tickets to go see God's Not Dead.
Oh wow.
Now the theater, I've done this with about 30, I don't know how many movies now. I've actually lost count. I'd have to go back and count it up. But right now I've been promoting the best Christmas pageant ever, which is actually in theaters right now. And then in about 2 weeks, November 22nd, Bonhoeffer, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, which some of the stuff you were talking about this morning obviously aligns. I mean, that's exactly what Bonhoeffer was facing. And hit the apathy of the church was one of the things that he struggled with, that they would not take a stand, right? And I think we see that same thing today. And so it is,
I'm with
it
you.
is concerning.
And one of the most impactful books on me and my Christian journey has been Dietrich Bonhoeffer's The Cost of Discipleship. It's a fantastic book. And it's worth learning about him personally and learning the history of the Third Reich and what happened, because there are a lot of people. We live in an era where everybody summons this history all the time to detract from their enemies, but not many people actually know the history. So so far, Tyson has brought up Feed My Lambs ministry, Men's Encounter at the Cross ministry. What's going to happen now is we're going to briefly transition over to locals. I'm going to let him talk about these ministries. I'm going to let him talk about his ministry in the GMC further. And so we've had 3 of you join the locals community. If you haven't joined up, but you want to hear more from Tyson, let's see. That link is plainspoken.locals.com. You should go over there now because that's where we're going. So we'll see you over there.